Alright, so in this video, we're going to add some basic validation to our app script. This is going to be just user-side validation, so not a server-side validation. What this basically means in human language is that this validation will be okay to prevent the good people from not entering the wrong thing in your data set, but this will not stop people who are trying to hack or do some malicious attacks be able to do those. So all those type of validations you have to do on your server side, we'll be doing just user side validation to just make sure our users enter data correctly. Now, first of all, let's understand what's the problem with our current form. So we have this as a form, and this is our data set. So the problem right now is that I could type only one field in this box. I don't even have to type anything in any of these boxes. I could just click run it, and it's going to add a new record to our database. So if I go back to our script, there it is. It's adding in our sheets a new line. So if I go back and run this again, see yet another line. So there is absolutely no validation happening right now. Our users can enter whatever they want. They hit run. It just runs our script. I'm going to delete these. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to add some HTML5 validations. So we want to make sure, for example, that they enter first and last name and maybe some other information before they hit run. So to do that, we're going to have to first open the HTML of this form. So I'm going to go back, open my page HTML. So this is our HTML. So this is our first input box, which is the first name, this one, and there's the last name, which is going to be this one. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go here and add required. And again, required. And that basically means that they have to enter something in these boxes to have a valid form. Now, if I save this, if we go back and refresh, what's going to happen if I don't type anything in here? See, I click away, see it goes to red because this is not a valid entry. However, even though it goes red now, and see if I click here, last name is red too because I didn't enter anything there. If I hit run, it's still gonna go and run the script, and it's still gonna add the line. Let me delete this. So just adding that is not enough because we're not really submitting a form. We're just basically grabbing this information from these fields, and then we run our own script. So let's see what we actually have done to run the script. So if you remember, in this page, we have the button. That button has the ID btn. That's the button we click to run the script. Now, if I go to our JavaScript, what happens here is that to that button, we have assigned an event listener for click event, and then we run this function do stuff. So do stuff is this function, which is where we grab all that information from that user entry and we just add it to our spreadsheet. What we need to do, we need to make sure that all the form entries are valid before we do all of this and add all this information to the spreadsheet. Now, first of all, I'm going to change this function name. Instead of do stuff, let's go back and rename this. So first of all, we're going to rename this here. Instead of do stuff, I'm going to say button click action. Let's do lowercase b. And match that function here. Just to make sure we don't have those meaningless names. So now it's going to be called this. Now in this function, currently we do all of this. Before I run all of that, I need to do a check. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to move all of this code to its own function. So I'm going to create another function here. I'm gonna call this add record. This is where we're gonna add the record. What that means is that I'm gonna move all of this, cut, go back here and add this to this add record function. And then in our button click action function, now we can just simply run this. And that should accomplish the same thing. So right now, nothing should have changed. So if I refresh this, I go click on this, it should add that line. I'm gonna delete that, go back. Now I'm gonna add a validation check. So let's check if that first name is valid. So to do that, I'm gonna do document.get element by ID. And the ID for our document and the ID for our first name box, if I'm not mistaken, there it is, it's FN. In HTML5, I can run this function on this called check validity. And basically, if that field is valid, this is going to give us true. Otherwise, this is going to give us false. So for example, if I just create a variable, I'm going to say var is valid equals to this. And if that form is valid, that's going to give us true. So what I can do now, I can do an if statement. And I can say if this is not valid, and the way I can do that, I can do exclamation valid, which will mean it's not valid. Then we want to make sure we don't really submit the form. For now, I'm going to add a comment. I'm going to say warn the user. Else, we're going to add our record. So right now, I don't have any warning for the user, but that's what we're going to add to this. But let's check if this prevents us to be able to enter a record in a system if first name is blank, right? So I'm going to go back now and refresh this. First name is blank. I'm going to click run it. Let's go and check. See, now we don't have a new line. So if I go back and add a first name and hit run, that should add a line to this. Here we go. I'm gonna delete it. So that prevents us to add a record. Now let's add a warning for this user. So I'm gonna go to materialize CSS and go under JavaScript section and use one of these things right here, whatever they call this. So that's going to just output a message like this, and basically it pops up and then it's going to just disappear in just a little bit. I'm going to copy this line, go back, and in our script we'll just do this, and this will be our actual message. We'll say first name is required. Save this. Now if I go back and refresh, if I run it, we get that message that says first name is required. And because I'm zoomed in a lot, that kind of looks weird. But if I zoom out to like more normal level, if I hit run, see, it's going to go there and say that that's not valid and it's going to just disappear. Now, if I do enter something here and hit run, that should not appear, and we should add it to our spreadsheet. All right, so that's that. So now we're able to basically do a validation check for a single field. Now I could do another if statement and say if the other one is not valid, then do this error message, right? And so on. So we could do like else ifs or something like that, but that is not sustainable. So we can't really have like 1700 if statements if we have a lot of fields in our form. So what I'm going to do instead, move this to its own function, this checking if something is valid or not. It's really this part of the code that checks if something is valid, and if it is not, it gives us this error message. In case it is, we just do this add record thing. So I'm going to go back here and create another function. We're going to call this check if valid. And I'm going to move that code in here. Let me copy that. So this is our check if valid function. Here, I'm just going to remove this whole if statement and this add record thing. Just leave it at this. And I'm also going to remove that. So now I want this function to be reusable. So what I want to do, I want to be able to pass the field to this function. And then I want to be able to pass the custom message we're going to give to that field. So I'm going to pass two arguments, LID for element ID, comma, and then message. And then we'll simply just use element ID here, and then message will go in a place of our message. So now we should be able to run this function with any ID and any message and just run all of this. That's going to run that code. Now we want to make sure that that function returns something, because if we check if it's valid, it should say it's valid or it's not valid. For that reason, we're going to just say if this is not valid, then we're going to do that message, and then we're going to return false. Otherwise, we're going to return true. Now I could have done else, open parentheses and close, and put the return true in here, but I don't really have to do that, because if the function hits the return line, it doesn't execute the rest of it. So if it goes inside of this if statement and hits this return false, then it's not going to keep running to also do return true. That's this. So how am I going to be using this function? First, in this button click action thing, I'm going to create an object, which is going to be the fields we want to validate with their error messages. So I'm going to say var to validate. I'm going to create this. We're going to do our field. So for example, fn would be the first name, and then the message we want to pass. So for example, first name is required. So that would be the message for the first name field. Now, if we wanted to also do the other field, which is like the ln, the last name ID, then we'll do this, and then we'll say last is required. And basically we should be able to just do this for any other field. So that's going to be the logic. So if we can make this work for this, we should be able to make this work for the rest of our fields and be able to just add it to this validation list and take care of this. What I need to do, I need to basically just run through this list of different fields we need to validate, and then check if the field is valid for all of them. And then if all of them are valid, we're going to add the record. If one of them is invalid, we should not add the record. I'm going to create a variable called ID keys. And here I'm going to do object.keys. And that's going to be from this object. So what this is going to do, it's basically just going to return an array of all these keys in here. And then because we have the array of keys, we should be able to loop through that. So we'll do ID keys dot for each. We'll loop through each one of those, and that will accept a callback function. Somehow I missed the parenthesis there. There it is. And this will basically be an argument. We'll call it ID. And we'll just have our IDs. Each one of those IDs will need to run this function. And we're going to give that the ID. And the message is going to be this. And to get to that message, we'll just take this object to validate and just grab the right key, which will be our ID, out of that. So that should just pass the message, and this should be our ID. So this should give us true or false. Let's create a variable first of all. We'll call it all valid equals true. So initially we'll assume that all fields are valid. And if we run this and this check if valid says false, then we need to modify this to false. Because if one of them is false, the whole thing should be false. So I'm going to create var is valid. And then I'm going to do an if statement. I'll say if is valid. Basically, if that's false, we want to be able to just modify this to false. And there are probably nicer ways of handling this, but this should be more or less simple. So now we'll check if it's false. We're going to just modify all valid to false. And finally, now we can just use that all valid to know if all the fields are valid or not. So we'll say if all valid, if all of that is true, then we're going to run our function. I'm going to save this. Let's just test this and see if this works. I'm going to refresh this. So I'm going to run. See, it says first name is required, last name is required. Now, let's just make sure we didn't add any records. No, we did not. So let's add a first name, Joe. I'm not going to add the last name. Last name is required. Again, nothing here. Now I'm going to go back here, add a last name, click run. It ran. Names are gone. And here's our new record. So that worked out pretty well. I'm going to delete this. Now we should be able now to validate more fields. So now let's say I also want to make sure that they pick something in this list. So I'll go back to my HTML and just scroll down, find that field. There's that select box. And I'm just going to add required to that. And that is the ID app. So I'll go back here and add it to the list of fields we want to validate. So I'll go here and say app. Please choose your app. So save that. If I refresh, see, not valid. If I switch to this, we don't get that error message because now we have a selection. So same thing we can do with this. If appointment is not selected, give an error message. Same process. We'll have to go back and add required to our field. That's the date picker. So it's just required. What else did we have? Let's just add everything. So that's the date and your favorite function. This is just autofilled. So your favorite function is also going to be required. So let's see where that is. It's this. This is this ID. We also get the ID of the other one. So I'm going to go here, add that too. We'll add some custom message. Comma here, and finally the date. This needs to be text. Here we go, save this. I'm going to go back and refresh. And now if I run this, see all of those are going to do this until we select something. Now that one is gone. If I choose something here and here, see now just first and last name. Now we shouldn't be adding anything here, see? And if we add, that should finally run our function and enter that here as a record. Seems like we should be clearing this field after we're done too, but other than that, and possibly this one as well. But other than that, that looks pretty good for our validation. Now the only thing I have left is the zip code, and for the zip code I don't want to do just regular validation, which I could just say it's required. But I also want to make sure I add a little something more custom in here. I want to make sure that they only enter a 5-digit number. So to do that, all I have to do is go back to that field, and that one is zip. There it is. That's our input box. Add first required, and then we can do this pattern thing in HTML5, and this will allow us to add regular expression validation. So now I can say that it has to be a regular expression and match a regular expression. I'm not going to talk about regular expressions in this video. I have videos about regular expressions with RegEx functions in Google Sheets. Maybe watch those for some more information. But for here, I'm going to say this starts with a number, which is this D, and it has to be a 5-digit number, and I'm going to do a $sign to end with it. So this means this starts with, this is this thing, and this is ends with, and this means it's a number, and this says it's a 5-digit number. So if I save this, now we should have more validation. Now we need to also add this to our list of fields we want to validate. We go back here, add that. Save this, go back and check this out. I'm going to refresh the zip code. See, it's already red. So if I do like 5.4, still red. If I do like this, still red. Let me just type something here so we don't get all those error messages for all of these boxes. So if I run, see it says, please enter valid zip code, because it's not valid zip code. Now if I do this, still not a valid zip code. And now if I hit run, that's a valid zip code. So now we should be adding that here. And that's an example of how you do something more custom in your validation other than just doing required. We can also use now regular expression to be able to validate these fields and make that happen. And that's our final work. So that should do it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.